I woke up choking on dirt. My hands were trembling, clawing desperately at cold, damp earth as if I'd been buried alive. Above me, tree branches twisted like skeletal fingers against a slate-black sky, whispering with the wind. My breath ripped through my throat in ragged gasps. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled under me. My knees sank into mud, soaking my jeans with icy rot. That's when I heard it, a voice, delicate as silk, threading through the trees. It wasn't whispering words, it was humming. A lullaby, slow and tender, drifting closer, until I swore I felt hot breath against my ear. I spun around, heart stammering, but there was nothing. Nothing but the cabin in the clearing ahead. Its windows were dark holes, watching me. The front door was wide open, just waiting. My throat tightened. I didn't remember coming outside. I didn't even remember falling asleep. I had rented this cabin to escape the chaos of my life too. Find silence, to finally sleep. Now I was crawling toward it, bloody fingernails digging into the moss, begging whatever waited inside to let me in. Because out here in the woods, something was hunting me, and it knew my name. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to run away from life. I always prided myself on grinding through the chaos, overtime hours, noisy neighbors, constant digital noise. But after the panic attack in my office bathroom, crouched over the toilet with my heart sprinting out of control, I knew I needed distance. So, I booked a cabin deep in the pine woods 2 states away. A little place I found online, listed under solitude retreats. Perfect for rest and reset. The photos showed a charming A-frame tucked among towering trees, a cozy fire pit, and a small lake nearby. It was exactly what I thought I needed. The drive took nearly 9 hours. The farther I got from the city, the more my shoulders loosened. By the time I pulled off the cracked asphalt onto a gravel path swallowed by forest, I felt almost human again. My phone had lost signal 2 hours back, but I welcomed the silence. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked exactly like the pictures, maybe even prettier. A rustic wood porch wrapped around the front, littered with pine needles. The front door was painted a cheerful red, a little faded. I unlocked it with the old brass key the owner mailed me, stepped inside, and instantly sighed. It was cool and smelled of cedar. The windows were cracked open, letting in a gentle breeze that fluttered the curtains. Inside was simple. A small living room with a brown corduroy couch, a kitchenette with mismatched mugs, and a short hallway leading to the bedroom and bath. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, filled with neatly stacked logs. I dropped my duffel on the floor and wandered around, running my hand along the grainy wooden walls. The place felt untouched by modern life. No TV, no Wi-Fi, no smart speakers chirping for attention. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Yet even as I settled in, unpacking groceries and tucking my clothes into the old dresser, I couldn't shake a thin strand of unease. Little things, barely anything, like how the rocking chair in the corner of the living room seemed angled just so, as if someone had recently been sitting there, watching the door, or how I kept catching my reflection in the darkened window glass at odd angles, moments when I wasn't even facing that direction. I laughed it off. I was stressed, exhausted. It was probably my brain overfiring, trying to scare me. The first night, I built a fire, heated up a can of stew, and ate it sitting cross-legged on the couch. Outside, the forest seemed to press against the cabin, dense and black. I tried reading, but every few minutes I found my eyes lifting to the windows, scanning the shifting shadows. Eventually, I crawled into bed. The sheets were cool, the mattress surprisingly firm. I lay there listening to the creaks of the old cabin settling, the sigh of wind through trees. The solitude was so complete, it was almost suffocating. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke to faint scratching, like claws on wood. I snapped upright, pulse hammering, held my breath. It came again, faint but distinct, from the kitchen. I waited, straining to hear, but there was nothing else. Finally, I told myself it was probably a raccoon or squirrel on the porch. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, and forced my eyes shut. The next morning, light was streaming through the bedroom window, golden and soft. I almost laughed at myself for being so jumpy. I decided to walk the property, breathe in fresh air, and maybe finally get my racing thoughts to slow down. Outside, dew still clung to the grass. I wandered around the back of the cabin, past the little woodshed, and into a patch of ferns. I found a narrow game trail that led deeper into the trees and followed it for a while, enjoying the bird calls and the smell of pine. But after maybe 15 minutes, I found something that made me pause. There was an old rotted tree stump with dozens of tiny carvings etched into it. Symbols I didn't recognize, sharp angles, almost like runes. Some had fresh cuts, the bark peeled back so recently the wood was still pale. A chill slipped down my spine. I knelt, running my fingers over them. Who would come way out here just to carve weird symbols into a stump? Teenagers messing around, hunters marking territory. I tried to shake it off, but when I returned to the cabin, I couldn't stop glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there among the trees, watching me. That evening, I lit the fireplace again. The flames danced, cracking and spitting, filling the room with a warm orange glow. I sat in the rocking chair, a mug of tea balanced on my knee, and tried to lose myself in a novel. But every time the logs shifted, making a sharp crack, I jumped. Once, I was sure I heard faint humming, so soft I thought it might be the Windex, that the melody was almost too deliberate. A lullaby tune, rising and falling with eerie sweetness. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably just air moving through the old chimney. I even forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle in the quiet room. Before bed, I went around making sure all the doors and windows were locked. I paused at the back door, the one leading to the small deck. The lock was undone. I swore I had locked it. Hadn't I? I must have forgotten. I secured it, double-checked it, then climbed into bed. That night, I dreamed of trees. Endless dark trunks stretching up into a sky that pulsed like a living thing. In the dream, I was running, heart exploding in my chest, something enormous crashing through the woods behind me. When I glanced back, I couldn't see it, but the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and rot. I woke slick with sweat, gasping. The cabin was silent, moonlight pooling across the floor. I lay back down, trying to slow my racing pulse, and told myself I needed to stop letting my mind spiral. The next morning, I found something strange. Out by the edge of the clearing, near the start of the game trail, someone or something had piled small stones into a little tower, balanced precariously, almost like a cairn. It hadn't been there yesterday. I crouched beside it, examining it with a growing sense of dread. It could have been local kids, but the nearest house was miles away. I hadn't seen another person since arriving. I knocked it over, the stones thudding softly to the ground. As I turned back toward the cabin, I felt this sharp, prickling sensation on my neck like being watched. I spun around, but of course there was nothing there. Just the silent, indifferent forest. Inside, the cabin felt a little colder. I found myself lighting the fireplace during the day just to chase off the chill. The rocking chair creaked sometimes. When I wasn't in it, shifting ever so slightly, as if someone invisible had just stood up. At night, I started hearing faint footsteps on the porch. Just a few slow, deliberate creaks of the old boards, and then silence. I'd creep to the window, heart hammering, press my face to the glass, nothing. Only the empty clearing, bathed in silver moonlight. I told myself I was unraveling. I had come out here to rest, to heal, and instead, my mind was playing cruel tricks on me. Maybe I was lonelier than I realized. Maybe I craved some kind of presence so badly, my brain invented one. But then there were the voices. Late that third night, I woke to whispering. It was so faint at first, I thought it might be the rustle of leaves outside, but it grew clearer, soft, breathy words, though I couldn't make them out. They seemed to come from right outside the bedroom door. I lay there, clutching the blanket to my chest, every muscle locked. The whispering went on for several minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it began. I waited, terrified to even breathe. Finally, I worked up the courage to tiptoe to the door and yank it open. The hallway was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing right there, pressed close to the door, murmuring to itself. When dawn finally crept through the windows, I found muddy footprints on the porch, small, almost childlike, leading right up to the front door, and then disappearing. That was the moment I realized something out here knew I was alone, and it was growing bolder. I tried to convince myself that I was simply on edge from the isolation. That's what any logical person would say, right? Long stretches of silence can do strange things to your mind. It's like your thoughts start echoing back at you, twisted into shapes you barely recognize. Still, after those muddy footprints appeared, I couldn't just let it go. I spent hours that morning pacing from window to window, peering out into the trees, hoping fearing I'd catch sight of someone or something. But there was only the forest, ancient and patient, holding its secrets in the hush of pine needles. By afternoon, I forced myself to get a grip. I needed distraction, anything to keep from spiraling. I grabbed a little hatchet I found by the fireplace and went out to chop some wood, hoping the physical labor would burn off the crawling tension under my skin. As I split logs, sweat trickling down my back, I felt watched. Every so often, I'd turn suddenly, scanning the underbrush, convinced I'd see a pale face peeking out, but the woods stayed stubbornly empty. When I finally stepped back inside, my shoulders and arms ached from swinging the hatchet. I actually welcomed the soreness, proof that something real existed outside my mind. I cooked myself a simple dinner, eggs, toast, and a can of beans. Ate it standing by the window, staring out at the tree line as dusk began its slow creep over the clearing. The sun sank behind the pines, leaving the sky streaked with blood red and bruised purple. Soon, everything was wrapped in shadow. I should have closed the curtains then, but part of me wanted to prove there was nothing out there to be afraid of. So I left them open, even though each dark window became a black mirror, reflecting the dim interior of the cabin. Later that night, while reading by the fireplace, I caught something move in the glass. Just a flicker, a pale smudge gliding behind me, past the doorway into the hall. My heart stuttered. I spun around so fast the book tumbled from my lap. The hall was empty. I waited, straining to hear anything over the crackling fire. Slowly, my breathing eased. I tried to laugh it off. Probably just my eyes adjusting to light and shadow, that's all. But that night would prove me wrong. I crawled into bed, exhausted from trying to hold my nerves together all day. I left the bedroom door cracked open, wanting to see down the short hallway, as if that small act of bravery might keep the creeping dread at bay. I woke sometime after midnight to a faint noise, not the cabin settling or wind outside. This was closer, a soft, wet, dragging sound. It came from the hallway. Lying there, staring at the dark slit of the open door, I tried to convince myself it was an animal under the house. Maybe the cabin had mice or raccoons. My breath fogged in the cold. Air had it gotten colder. I pulled the blanket tighter, eyes wide, refusing to blink. The dragging stopped. Silence pooled thick and heavy. Then came a new sound, slow creak, like weight shifting on old floorboards. Closer now, right outside my door. My mouth went dry. I waited, counting the frantic beats of my heart. Then the door nudged open, just an inch. Enough for cold air to rush in. enough for me to imagine something standing there in the dark, peering at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I lay frozen, eyes locked on that narrow slice of darker shadow. Long minutes passed. Finally, as if whatever was there lost interest, the door eased shut again with a tiny click. I didn't sleep at all after that. I just lay there, muscles cramped and trembling, waiting for the handle to turn, for someone or something to slip inside. When weak light finally bled through the curtains, I got up and inspected the hallway. There was nothing out of place. The door still latched properly. I even checked the floors for scuff marks or dirt. Nothing. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, a half-waking nightmare. But that morning, when I went to the front door to get more wood, I found muddy smears on the inside of the door frame, as if small, filthy hands had pushed it open in the night. That was the first time real fear took root in my chest, cold and merciless. I should have left then, packed my bags, driven straight down that gravel road, never looked back. But fear does strange things. It can paralyze you, make you second-guess the very instincts meant to keep you alive. I didn't want to believe something was truly wrong. I didn't want to think I was being hunted. Instead, I convinced myself to stay busy. I scrubbed the kitchen, swept the floors, even took down all the curtains to wash them, wanting to rid the cabin of any lingering mildew smell. In the afternoon, I tried to write in my journal, something I used to love. I sat on the porch with a steaming mug of tea, pen tapping against the paper, but the words wouldn't come. Every few minutes, I'd look up, certain I'd heard branches crack or leaves shuffle in a deliberate way. When the sun slipped low, turning everything copper and shadow, I decided to go inside. But as I stepped up onto the porch, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. On the wooden railing, right where my hand usually rested when I sipped my tea, were 3 long scratches, deep grooves, as if something with claws had dragged them across the wood. I stared at them for a long time, my heart skittering wildly. I even ran my finger along one groove, feeling the splinters catch. It was fresh. The raw wood was pale and damp. I backed into the cabin and locked the door, double-locked it, then pushed a heavy chair up under the handle. That night, the cabin felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. I couldn't relax, couldn't even sit still. I wandered from room to room, checking locks, peeking out windows. The forest pressed close on every side, a living wall of darkness. I ended up falling asleep on the couch by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, embers glowing softly in the grate. I thought maybe the light would keep the darkness at bay. I was wrong. I woke up to whispering again. It was right behind me, so close. I felt breath stir the tiny hairs on my neck. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body locked up, every muscle screaming to run, while another, older instinct told me to stay perfectly still, like prey hiding from a predator. The whispering grew clearer, a soft, almost musical voice, saying words I couldn't understand. They were too garbled, too quick, slipping through my mind like fish through water. I shut my eyes, tried to pretend it wasn't there. Then I felt a weight pressed down on the couch cushions beside me. Slowly, deliberately, as if someone had sat down. The old couch groaned under it. I smelled earth-wet leaves and rot. I nearly sobbed. The whispering stopped. I waited a minute, then another. The weight finally lifted, and I heard the faintest shuffle across the wooden floor. When I finally cracked my eyes open, the room was empty. Only the fire remained, burning low, throwing skittish shadows against the walls. I didn't sleep again. That night, I sat bolt upright on the couch until dawn, clutching the blanket like a lifeline, every creak of the cabin making me flinch. When morning finally came, I opened the door and stumbled outside, desperate for fresh air. I almost collapsed on the porch, gulping it down like I'd been drowning. Then I saw them, tiny handprints, in the dew on the porch boards, leading right up to where I'd been sleeping by the fire. Not muddy this time, just perfect, delicate impressions in the damp wood. 5 little fingers. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just in my head. Something out here was aware of me, and it was growing braver with every night that passed. I stopped trusting my own senses. That was the worst part. Worse than the footprints, the voices, the sense of something hovering just outside my vision. It was the slow, grinding uncertainty that unraveled me, because once doubt sinks its claws in, nothing feels solid anymore. The morning after I found those tiny handprints in the dew, I nearly packed up and left. I stood in the bedroom, shoving clothes back into my duffel with frantic, jerky motions. Every nerve screamed to run, to get in my car, fly down that gravel road until the trees spit me back out into the safety of crowded highways and fast food signs. Then I heard it, my name, whispered in the softest voice, right behind me. I spun around so hard I nearly fell. The room was empty. Sunlight poured through the dusty window, catching motes of dust that floated lazily in the still air. "Get it together," I muttered to myself. My voice sounded hollow, unfamiliar. I tried to laugh. It came out strained, choked off by panic. Because that voice, it hadn't sounded distant, like something echoing from the woods. It was inside the room with me. I dropped my duffel. My hands were shaking too badly to finish packing. I stood there, taking deep breaths, telling myself it was sleep deprivation, stress, isolation, my mind conjuring illusions to fill the oppressive quiet. I decided to step outside, breathe fresh air, ground myself. The forest usually calmed me, its scents and subtle noises a welcome distraction. I followed the narrow game trail again, deeper this time, letting my feet move on autopilot. But after what felt like 20 minutes, I realized the trail didn't look right. The trees grew unnaturally close, leaning together at odd angles. Moss carpeted the ground so thick it swallowed my shoes. No birdsong, no wind, just a heavy, muffled silence. I turned to go back, and my stomach dropped. The path was gone. Where there had been a narrow trail through the ferns and brush, there was now only dense forest. Thick trunks and twisted undergrowth blocked every direction. I spun around, heart thundering. How was that possible? I hadn't walked that far. I should have been able to see the clearing, or at least some sign of the path. I picked a direction and pushed through the trees, branches clawing at my arms. Every few steps I paused, hoping to glimpse the cabin through the foliage. Nothing. That's when I started hearing the laughter. Soft at first, like children playing far off. I couldn't make out words, only the bright, cruel sound of giggling. It floated through the trees, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Panic took over. I broke into a run, shoving aside low branches, stumbling over roots. The laughter grew louder, circling me. I slammed into a tree, scraping my shoulder, and spun, around no one there. Only that sound like dozens of tiny voices, delighting in my fear. "Stop it!" I screamed into the trees. My voice cracked. Silence. Then, close to my ear, a breathy whisper. "Why would you leave us?" I bolted. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they'd snap. I burst into the clearing so suddenly I nearly tripped. There was the cabin, squatting quietly, sun glinting off its roof as if nothing had happened. I staggered up the steps and slammed inside, locking the door behind me. My entire body shook. I leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was curled on the floor. How long had I been gone? The sun hadn't moved much. Maybe an hour? It felt like I'd been wandering for days. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, every light in the cabin blazing, clutching a mug of cold tea. My eyes burned, gritty from exhaustion. I kept expecting to hear those whispers again. Sometime after midnight, I did. They started as hushed murmurs, impossible to pin down. Then words began to form, rising out of the jumble. He's watching. Don't look at the window. It's your fault. I slapped my hands over my ears. Shut up. Shut up. I squeezed my eyes shut so hard, bright patterns danced behind my eyelids. When I opened them, the cabin was dark. All the lamps, the overhead lights gone, as if someone had thrown a switch. My mug clattered to the floor. I stumbled to the nearest lamp, flipping the switch frantically. Nothing. I tried another. Still nothing. Then I noticed the window. Something was pressed against the glass. A pale face, small, childish eyes, huge and black, staring at me. I screamed, stumbling backward so hard I hit the counter. The face vanished. I rushed to the window, hands trembling, breath fogging the glass. Outside was empty. Only the moonlit clearing, the dark line of trees. I stood there, gasping, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. I told myself it was a hallucination, brought on by lack of sleep. Then I heard soft tapping, not at the window, at the front door. Tap, 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 slow, patient, like it knew I was standing there holding my breath. I didn't move, didn't dare. The tapping went on for what felt like hours, then stopped. The next morning, I found muddy footprints in the kitchen, leading from the front door, across the floor, to the bedroom. Small prints, like a child's. I felt something inside me snap. I grabbed my duffel, stuffing it with anything I could find. Clothes, my wallet, car keys. I flung open the front door, only to stop dead. My car was gone, not just gone from sight, gone entirely. No tracks on the gravel drive, no sign it had ever been there, just unbroken moss and pine needles. I staggered back inside, my mind reeling. Had I imagined driving here? No. I remembered the hours on the highway, the coffee stops, the feel of the wheel under my hands. I sank to the floor, gripping my head. Was I losing my mind? Was I still in the city somewhere, having a breakdown? Or was something out here playing with me? That's when the moral dilemma started. The whispers returned that afternoon. This time, they came with images. Every time I blinked, I saw flashes children's faces, hollow-eyed and weeping. A man hanging from a tree, rope cutting deep into his swollen neck. A woman kneeling in the dirt, hands clasped as if praying, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. The voices crowded close, hissing in my ears. Let us in. It will stop if you let us in. You can end it. They wanted me to open the door, or maybe something more. I didn't understand, and I didn't want to. I tried to block it out, barricading myself in the bedroom. But even there, the hallucinations followed me. The walls pulsed like they were breathing. Dark stains spread across the floorboards, seeping under the door. Sometimes, I felt something brush my ankle, icy fingers curling around my skin. On the third day without real sleep, delirium set in. I found myself standing at the front door, hand on the knob, heart racing. If I opened it, would it stop? Maybe the nightmares, the hallucinations, maybe they were offering me a way out, a bargain. My mind twisted it into something almost reasonable. What if this was a test? What if opening the door would free them, or free me? Then, a soft voice, clearer than ever, whispered, "We just want to play." I yanked my hand back like I'd touched a hot stove. "No," I shouted, tears blurring my vision. "I won't." The cabin seemed to shudder around me. A low groan moved through the walls. The floor, like the whole structure, was disappointed. That night, they retaliated. I woke to find myself outside, kneeling in the dirt, hands plunged into cold earth. My fingernails were torn and packed with soil. I didn't know how I got there. Around me, dozens of little stone cairns had been built in a rough circle, each one topped with small trinkets, buttons, teeth, scraps of faded cloth. They hadn't been there before. As I staggered to my feet, I heard giggling in the trees. Dozens of tiny shapes moved just out of sight, flitting between trunks, watching, waiting. I stumbled back to the cabin, slammed the door, and sank to the floor. My hands were covered in dirt and something darker. I didn't want to know what it was. That was the first night I truly considered doing what they asked. Not because I believed it would end the horror, but because I couldn't stand the not knowing. What would happen if I opened the door, invited them in, gave them what they wanted? Maybe it would end the nightmare. Maybe it would be worse. Maybe it would be a relief to finally stop fighting. The moral weight of it crushed me. If I opened the door, was I complicit in whatever came next? Was I condemning myself, or something far worse? I spent hours rocking on the floor, whispering apologies to no one. When the sun finally rose, I realized it was the first time in days I hadn't heard the voices. But I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my choice. In that fragile silence, I found a shred of resolve. I barricaded the doors and windows with furniture, nailed boards across. Then, anything to keep the darkness out. I couldn't trust my own mind, but I could at least create a barrier. As I hammered the last board into place, I heard soft laughter right behind me. I spun around, breath caught in my throat. No one there, but on the floor, right where I'd been kneeling, was a small handprint, pressed into the dust, still wet. It was a message. You can't keep us out forever. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the hammer like a weapon, trying to brace myself for whatever would come next, knowing deep down that the real horror hadn't even begun. Ask ChatGPT. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees again, staining the sky a bruised purple, I was at my limit. I hadn't eaten more than a handful of crackers in days. My hands shook constantly. My eyes twitched at every shadow. The boards over the windows felt flimsy, almost mocking me. I sat on the floor by the fireplace, hugging my knees. Every creak of the cabin felt deliberate, as though something was moving just beyond the walls, pressing its weight against the old wood, testing for weaknesses. That was when the knocking started. Not soft taps like before. This was deliberate. A heavy, measured knock at the front door. 3 times. Then silence. I squeezed my eyes shut. I thought if I didn't look, didn't acknowledge it, it would go away. Then it started again, this time on the back door. 3 sharp knocks. I flinched, heart leaping painfully in my chest. Another pause. Then came a scraping along the side of the cabin, like claws or fingernails dragging slowly across the wooden slats, circling the house. It moved past the boarded windows, past the nail-shut back door, all the way around until it returned to the front. It knocked again, harder. The boards over the window rattled. I couldn't take it anymore. Clutching the hammer, I crept toward the front door. My breath came shallow, my body screaming at me to stop, to hide, but some desperate curiosity pushed me on. I pressed my ear to the door. At first I heard nothing, then a whisper low, hungry. Not words this time, just a guttural rasp, like something breathing that had never needed lungs before. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The knocking stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt intentional, like whatever was out there was waiting, savoring my terror. That night, I couldn't bear to sit idle. I paced the cabin for hours. Each time I passed a window, I half expected to see a face peering through the cracks. Each time I checked the door, I braced for the handle to turn. At some point, I realized the fireplace had gone cold. That was strange. I didn't remember the fire dying. I crouched down to stir the ashes and froze. In the gray dust were dozens of tiny footprints. Bare feet pressed deep into the ash. They crisscrossed the hearth, leading out across the floor toward the bedroom. My stomach twisted. Slowly, I followed them. They led through the hall, paused outside my bedroom door, where the prints overlapped again and again, as though something had stood there a long time, then veered off toward the kitchen. I crept after them, trying to steady my breathing. In the kitchen, They simply stopped. No smears, no fading away. Just a cluster of prints in the middle of the floor, facing the window. I backed away. As I did, I noticed something else. The rocking chair in the living room was moving, just slightly, as if someone had just stood up. It swayed back and forth with a faint squeal of old wood. That's when I smelled it. Damp earth, rotting leaves, the same smell that had haunted my nightmares. I turned and finally saw it, not clearly, just a shape darker than the shadows. It loomed in the corner of the room, impossibly tall, its edges shifting like smoke. As if they were eyes gleamed faintly, catching the dim light. It didn't move, didn't rush me or reach out. It simply watched. My throat convulsed. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a strangled croak. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table, never taking my eyes off that shape. Then, in the space of a blink, it was gone. The chair stopped rocking. Silence fell, deep and oppressive. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, hands clutching my chest like I could physically hold my heart together. At dawn, I made my decision. I couldn't stay here another night. I didn't care if my car was missing, if the road itself had disappeared. I would walk out of these woods if I had to. I packed my bag with shaking hands, barely aware of what I stuffed inside. Water bottle, a few granola bars, the hammer. I didn't even bother locking the cabin door behind me. As I stepped off the porch, the morning light seemed too bright, too harsh. The forest waited, silent and expectant. I chose a direction and started walking. I didn't care if it was the same path I'd tried before. I just needed to move. Each step away from the cabin felt like peeling off a layer of suffocating fear. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. I had no way of knowing. The forest didn't change. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches twisted like grasping hands. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps behind me, soft and quick, but when I turned, there was nothing. Then I found the clearing. My heart plummeted, because there was the cabin, exactly as I'd left it, my footprints from that morning still fresh in the dirt. I staggered forward, circling it in disbelief. It was the same cabin, same warped porch boards, same scratches on the railing, even the tiny handprints still smeared on the doorframe. Somehow, no matter which way I walked, the forest had led me back here. I sank onto the steps, head in my hands. Tears spilled through my fingers. I was trapped. I must have dozed off, because I woke to the feeling of cold breath on my neck. I jerked upright, whipping around. The porch was empty, but the door behind me stood open. I didn't remember opening it. Against every instinct, I stepped inside. The cabin felt darker, as if the sun had already set. I moved cautiously through the rooms, half expecting that towering shadow to be waiting in each corner. Then I noticed the photographs. They were pinned to the walls, old curling black and white prints. Dozens of them, covering every surface. Where had these come from? They hadn't been there before. I approached one, squinting. It showed a family standing in front of the cabin. A man, a woman, 2 children. Their faces were blurry, smeared somehow, as if the camera had been shaking or as if they'd moved too quickly. Another photo showed the inside of the cabin. The same furniture, the same fireplace, but there was something wrong with the shadows. They were too dark, too deep, almost like holes torn in the image. As I moved from picture to picture, dread pooled in my stomach, because in every photo, somewhere in the background, was that shape, sometimes by the trees, sometimes peering through a window, always watching. At the very end of the hall was a mirror, old, its silver backing spotted and corroded. As I stepped up to it, my breath caught, because in its reflection, the cabin wasn't empty. Behind me stood that towering shadow, its form writhing, darker than anything should be. It hovered inches from my back, tendrils of blackness coiling toward me. I spun around, Nothing. The hall was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, it was gone from the reflection too. I stumbled away, half mad with terror. That night, the cabin felt alive. The walls pulsed with faint movement. The floors seemed to breathe under my feet. Whispers filled the rooms, overlapping in a maddening chorus. Some were pleading, others mocking. "It's your turn. Why do you fight us? You've always been here." That last one rooted me to the spot, because something about it rang horribly true. I couldn't remember my life before this place. The frantic days in the city, the office bathroom panic attack, were they real? Or just another story I'd told myself to explain how I ended up here? I tried to push the thought away, but memories twisted in my mind. The first day at the cabin, how familiar it had all felt. The way I'd known instinctively where things were. How to start the old fireplace, where the extra blankets were stored. Had I ever really left this place? The realization hit like ice water. I stumbled to the front door and threw it open. Outside, the forest stretched on, endless and indifferent. And there, just at the tree line, stood the shadow, watching me, waiting. I screamed at its rage, terror, desperation, all tangled together. But it didn't move. It didn't have to, because deep down, I knew it had already won. This was its domain, and it had always been mine too. The loop was closing. I could feel it tightening around me, a noose of memory and fear. I backed into the cabin, slamming the door, sliding down to the floor. As I sat there in the dark, listening to the whispers swirl around me, a horrifying thought took root. Maybe I was never meant to leave. Maybe I'd always belonged to this place, to it. The last thing I saw before exhaustion claimed me was a shape moving through the doorway, tall, shifting, coming closer. And as the darkness swallowed me, I realized somewhere, been here before, many times. And each time, I forgot, only to remember again, right at the end. Ask ChatGPT. I woke on the floor of the cabin, head pounding, mouth dry as dust. At first, there was only confusion. Why was I there? Why did every muscle ache as if I'd been fighting for my life? Then it all returned in a crushing flood. The whispers, the shadow, the mirror, the feeling that none of this was truly new. My breath shuddered in my chest. I sat up slowly, muscles screaming, and scanned the room. Nothing but faint gray light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. The silence pressed close. To complete, like the entire world was holding its breath. A thought settled into my brain, heavy and cold. I have to get out, now, or I never will. I staggered to my feet, gripping the wall for balance. My bag was still near the door, half packed from days ago. I stuffed a few more things inside, trembling so badly I could barely hold onto anything, then slung it over my shoulder and reached for the door. My hand paused on the handle. A voice inside whispered, "Don't open it. That's what it wants." But what choice did I have? If I stayed, I'd become just another whisper in these walls. Another photograph pinned up by unseen hands. Another memory feeding whatever horror lived here. With a deep, ragged breath, I flung the door open. Outside, the forest waited, dense, dark, patient. It was early, maybe dawn, judging by the washed-out sky, though it was impossible to tell for sure. The air smelled wet and raw, like overturned soil. Every tree seemed to lean toward me slightly, as if listening. I stepped off the porch, forcing myself not to look back at the cabin. If I did, I feared I'd see someone or something watching me from the window. I picked a direction and started walking. My feet sank into the mossy earth with each step, and every crack of a twig seemed to echo like a gunshot. I moved as quickly as I could without breaking into a run, terrified that sprinting would trigger the forest's hunger like it might chase me if it sensed real desperation. Time slipped in strange ways. Sometimes it felt like I'd only gone a few yards, sometimes like I'd been walking for hours. My thoughts tangled in knots, memories circling back on themselves. I tried to remember my apartment, my job, my friends, but the images came distorted, faces blurred, voices hollow. A sharp noise snapped me from my daze. Laughter high, childlike, far off but getting closer. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. Nothing but endless trees. I forced myself onward. Minutes later, I found the path. A thin ribbon of trampled earth, almost hidden by ferns and fallen branches. Relief surged through me, hot and dizzying. If there's a path, it must lead somewhere. Out of these woods, away from that place. I followed it at a near jog, ignoring how the laughter sometimes moved alongside me, flitting just out of sight, ignoring how shapes darted between trees, always gone when I turned my head. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into another clearing. My breath hitched. It was the cabin. Same slanted roof, same red door, same porch, littered with pine needles, as if all my frantic effort had been a cruel joke, a maze designed to turn me back on myself. My bag slipped from my shoulder and hit the ground. I doubled over, hands gripping my knees, fighting back a scream. Tears burned hot in my eyes. I'm never getting out of here. A voice drifted from behind me, gentle, familiar. Why do you keep running from us? I spun around. My heart nearly stopped. It was my mother, or it looked like her, standing between the trees in her favorite yellow dress, the one we buried her in. Her skin was too pale, her smile too wide, eyes glistening black in the dim light. Mom, my voice cracked. She held out a hand. Come home. It's time to stop being afraid. Every instinct shrieked to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Tears spilled down my face. I missed her so much. The grief never healed. It only scabbed over. Seeing her there ripped it open raw. Don't you want to come home? She coaxed. Her voice was sweet, but under it was something else, something hollow and hungry. I can't. You're not real. The words felt like shards in my mouth. Her smile faltered. For a moment, her eyes flickered empty sockets, yawning wide, crawling with tiny shapes. Then they were black again, reflective pools that showed my own terrified face. You've always been here, she said, just like us. Why keep fighting it? She stepped closer. I stumbled back. My heel caught on a root, and I fell hard, breath knocked from my lungs. When I looked up, she loomed over me, that impossible smile stretching wider, splitting her cheeks. Cold hands seized my shoulders. I screamed, kicking, clawing. The forest tilted, shadows swirling, her face splitting open into writhing darkness. Then I was free, stumbling to my feet, lungs burning. The clearing was empty. My mother was gone. Only the cabin remained, silent and waiting. Something inside me broke then. I sprinted past the cabin, into the trees, branches slashing my arms and face. I didn't care. I ran until spots danced before my eyes. My foot caught on something, and I hit the ground hard. The world spun. When it settled, I realized I was lying in another clearing, and there was the cabin, again, except it was different, older. The wood was gray, sagging with rot. The porch half collapsed, the door hanging off one hinge. It looked abandoned for decades. I got to my feet on trembling legs. Against every shred of sense, I approached, peered through the doorway. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and rot. The furniture was broken, covered in mold. Cobwebs draped the corners. But the walls were the same layout, the same fireplace, though now choked with debris. I backed away, mind whirling. Had I been here before? Was this the future? The past? Then I saw it. In the dust on the floor, fresh footprints. Mine, leading deeper inside. A deep, choking dread settled in my chest. I followed them because I had no choice, feet moving of their own accord. They led to the bedroom, to the mirror. I stared at my reflection, gaunt, filthy, eyes wide with terror. Then the mirror rippled. My reflection smiled. Not am I it. Its eyes turned black, mouth stretching impossibly wide. "It's time," it whispered. Hands cold, countless burst from the glass and grabbed me. I screamed as they pulled, dragging me into darkness. Through the glass, through myself. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the familiar cabin. The cabin that wasn't rotting, wasn't old. The boards were intact, the furniture neat. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the window. I scrambled up, heart racing. Had it all been a nightmare, a hallucination from exhaustion and terror? Then I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate. The door creaked open. A figure filled the doorway, tall, shrouded in shadow, its form writhing, never settling into a single shape. Eyes opened across its body, blinking in slow, deliberate patterns. The monster, real. It stepped inside. The floor didn't creak under its weight. It was as if it floated, gliding over the wood. My back hit the wall, nowhere left to run. A tendril of darkness reached out, brushing my cheek. It was cold, so impossibly cold, it burned. I flinched, tears streaming. "You understand now," it whispered, though no mouth moved. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, rattling my bones. What are you?" I rasped. It leaned closer, eyes rippling across its surface. "Home," it breathed. A flood of memories crashed through mother cabins, other forests, other lives. Each time ending the same way. Each time, me, trapped, forgotten, drawn back to this place to feed it, to be part of it. I had never left. I would never leave, because this was a loop, a cycle without end. The ultimate horror, not death, but endless return. My biggest fear, that all my running, my desperate hope for escape, had been meaningless. That I was always meant to end up back here. "Please," I sobbed. "I don't want this." It didn't reply, just enveloped me. Darkness folded around me, smothering breath, sight, thought. In that final instant, I felt my body dissolve into the black, felt myself becoming part of Itena the Whisper, another shadow behind the trees. When the light returned, I was standing on the porch, breathing in pine-scented air. My hands were clean, my clothes fresh. The cabin stood quietly behind me, cheerful and inviting. I felt a smile stretch across my face. I didn't remember why I was smiling, or why my heart beat so slow and heavy. Somewhere in the trees, I heard laughter. It was warm, familiar. I picked up my bag, stepped off the porch, and started down the path, certain that this time I would finally find my way out, not knowing that I had already tried 1,000 times, not knowing that I was right back at the start, caught in the endless loop, forever running from the truth. This was home. It always had been. I stood at the edge of the clearing, breath misting in the cool morning air, suitcase in hand. The same gravel drive stretched ahead of me, winding through towering pines that dripped with moss. The same old cabin waited at the center, sunlight glinting off its windows as if beckoning me inside. And just like before, I felt that tugging odd, almost nostalgic ache in my chest. I'd been under so much stress back in the city. Panic attacks at work, that constant sense of drowning. I'd needed this. Peace, solitude, a break from everything. Funny though, I couldn't quite remember packing, or how long the drive had actually taken. Only flashes, trees blurring past the windshield, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Still, I breathed a sigh of relief. This was it, a weekend alone, with nothing but the hush of the forest to soothe my nerves. Exactly what I needed. I stepped up onto the porch. My shoes crunched on loose grit. The wood creaked under my weight in a strangely familiar wail. I could recognize me, as if it had been waiting. I smiled faintly. Don't be ridiculous. Inside, the cabin was just as advertised. Cozy, rustic, a stone fireplace with neat stacks of wood beside it, a small kitchen, the bedroom down the short hall. The air smelled faintly of pine and old dust. I set my suitcase down by the door and wandered through, touching surfaces without realizing it, my hand trailing across the table, the back of a worn chair. Each contact sent a tiny shiver through me, like déjà vu, sliding cold fingers down my spine. In the bedroom, I caught my reflection in a cracked mirror on the dresser. For a second, my heart stuttered. It wasn't quite right. My eyes looked too dark, too deep, but when I blinked, it was just me, again drawn and tired, with faint shadows under my eyes. "Get it together," I whispered, almost laughing. God, I needed sleep. I unpacked slowly. As I placed my bag at the foot of the bed, I noticed tiny marks on the wooden floorboards, faint outlines, almost like footprints, small ones. My stomach twisted. I knelt down, ran my fingers over them. They were damp, as though freshly made. Impossible. A sudden chill swept the room. Somewhere deep in the cabin, a floorboard creaked exactly, the same sound that had startled me on my very first night here. I straightened up, heart thudding, a cold sweat breaking out along my neck. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done all of this before, that I was tracing the same steps over and over, caught in some hidden snare. And then, outside the window, something moved. I turned quickly, but saw only the sunlit trees swaying gently. No figure, no shadow, just that eerie, silent forest, waiting. Still, a sick certainty settled in my gut. I had rented this cabin to find peace. Now once again I realized, too late, I would be begging to leave.